Let's talk about The Wizard by Gene Wolfe, which is confusingly book 2 in The Wizard Knight. It's a duology. It's about 900 pages long in the current Tor, is it Tor Essentials? Or Tor, yeah, Tor Essentials printing in the US and Canada, though I bought it in the UK, obviously. So The Wizard is book 2. I've got a review of The Knight up on this channel. It will be in the Gene Wolfe playlist. What I do, like I normally do for kind of continuations in a series, is I'll do a short, completely spoiler-free review just to sort of, hey, you don't know if the series is any good, you don't know if it continues to be good. I don't want to get, I haven't even read these, but I don't want to get Brent Weekes on this. So does it finish well? And so I'll talk about that. And then I'll give a spoiler-free review for Wizard, but spoiling Knight, talking about kind of how it connects to Knight. So that's for those people who have read Knight and are thinking about going on to Wizard, or kind of just shaping their thoughts as they start reading Wizard. So, yes, it is the story. Wizard Knight in general is the story of a boy called Abel. Maybe he's 12, or that is what he is known as in this fantasy world. He's an American. He gets transported into a fantasy world, and he ends up fairly quickly in being aged and becoming a knight. Like he becomes supernaturally aged very early in that book and becomes a knight. And the adventures are about kind of what is being a knight. Basically, knight is about being a knight, obviously. You're not surprised by that. But it's about what is being a knight, and aspiration and honour, chivalry. It's in a very interesting 7-tiered universe, kind of a pseudo-medieval cosmology. It's not medieval. It's reminiscent of other, well, medieval pseudo-cosmologies like in Dante, Mythgathir, and also like the Norse cosmology. Mythgathir is this human layer where there are some giants and there are some other things, but we live there. Humans in the fantasy world live there, and above there's a sort of I guess Valhalla layer, and below there's Elfriki, which is fairy, and then there's other layers above and below that, but we're in the middle, and that's where the action is. And the first book is very good, and you can see my review of that. The second book, Wizard, the biggest thing that comes up as a criticism of Wizard is, and it's a material one, is that it has a slow start. So you kind of read halfway through, and then you're reading another 150 pages of relatively, in the second half of the big book, and it's quite slow. And I think that gets compared to, for people who've read other Gene Wolfe books, to book 3 of Book of the Long Sun, maybe book 3 of Book of the New Sun. It's an odd thing, actually, that it's that chunk. It is the third chunk of a story, the third out of 4 chunks in a story that Wolfe may slow down on. At least that's the sample size of 3 of these. And I do think that's true. I think it's a little slow as it starts and moves into these newer themes, this new set of locations and stories, and in classic Wolfian terms, dumps new characters in but drags old characters in weird ways. And a particular thing that it does show with book 3 of the Long Sun, Chaldea of the Long Sun, and this thing I actually talked about when I talked about that book, both spoiler and non-spoiler, is that Chaldea switches from first person to a mixed point of view. First person is the wrong way to put it. Single point of view to multi-point of view. And though, because it's third person technically, Wizard Knight, Wizard does the same, that it switches for a while from sole point of view, just Abel, the character Abel, to multi-point of view. And Abel actually frames that, I'm going to report stuff that I didn't see, but other people told me. And there is an interesting thing about the way in which narrators work in Wolfe, that he talks about that. There is actually a thing you could think about, but it is a bit slow. I did not find it anywhere near as bad as some people do. I wonder if the fact I read it slowly because I was very busy meant that helped. I was like, oh, that was nice. Also, the other reason I read it slow, other than being busy, was it's dense, it's Wolfe, and I was very struck by the density when my brain wasn't always firing at high capacity. I was like, I'm going to read like 10 or 20 pages and then just put it down. I enjoyed it, but I was like, oh wow, I need to think about it. And so maybe that didn't hurt as much for me, but whatever it was, I really enjoyed it and thought it was effective. As in, I thought that it wasn't too slow. I think it is slower to start with. It then speeds up in the second half of the book, particularly in the final quarter or whatever, or third. It rapidly paces up into a crescendo of a conclusion, which is very satisfying. There's an interesting thing that structurally it does feel a little bit fragile, and a little bit kind of bits and pieces-y, but and the ending is unusual. It's odd. There's some interesting stuff in terms of when, I was reading reviews of it, including by Yunsuin D&D designer David McGrogan. If you're on Goodreads, you can see his review of it. But a very interesting D&D designer. But yeah, he and others kind of talk about the ending, and people really love the ending. It's a kind of weird ending. I don't just mean the actual tone or nature of it, but just the things that happen, the way it comes about. The shift of the type of story in that final quarter or third just is fascinating. It's a fascinating decision that almost shouldn't work, but really does. It's incredibly successful, and it's a widely agreed thing in terms of people who've read Wizard, is that final quarter is very strong. The characters are fascinating. In fact, you get a selection of some of the most textured, most interesting characters you get in Wolfe. So yeah, I think as a high-level view, Wizard ends the duology very strongly, with some caveats about pace that you'll find other people more critical of. I think there is, as with all Wolfe books, there's a lot of complexity. There's a lot of stuff about, like, what do I think of this character? What did happen in this instance? There are Wolfian, I wouldn't call them tricks of writing, but habits of writing where he intentionally is elliptical, trusting you to piece the things together. And there's a particular instance in the final chunk of the book, final quarter, final third, which you're like, this has done this on purpose. This is Wolfe openly doing this. He's openly doing not the sleight of hand of not telling you something, leaving you in one situation, and in the next paragraph functioning wrong. And then anyway, this was all resolved, and you're like, okay, I've got to go. Of course, one thing is he, much like when a Buddha or a Christ explains a parable or a tale, he gives an exemplar, then explains it. That is there to show you that there is a general pattern, and Wolfe, I think, does those things. Very much trading on certain classical models of sometimes just showing you there is a sleight of hand going on. With a bit more detail, passing on from Night then for the second half of this review or whatever. It's a fitting conclusion tonight. You have Abel having basically had some, how clear is it what's exactly happened at the end of it? I think it's pretty clear what's happened at the end of Night, isn't it? There is a Valkyrie who goes and picks up Abel after a great victory with his horrendous injuries. Basically, Abel has gone up to Sky. He's gone up to Valhalla. He is a hero. Now, the second book, this is a really interesting decision. The second book does not give us lots of stuff about Sky at the start. It says, here's what's happening elsewhere. Here's all the other stuff. And, and this is how Abel comes back into the tale in Mythgathir with the main characters, the other main characters, two Gununs, particularly at the start in Gilf and Manny and Lady Adine and Lord Beale, and all these people going to Jotunland. That kind of continues. So your Abel disappears and then is reintroduced into that. And there are lots of things mulling in my head about the way in which Wolfe talks about this septuple Deca universe, and what we see and what we don't see, and how we engage with different parts of it. But the basic thing is that, it starts off like that, and the first half of Wizard basically is about the journey and activities in Jotunland, and there's some other stuff too. There's without going into any details on that sense, you get a lot of stuff about kind of what happens to resolve the initial setup in the first book of this trip to Jotunland. And then the wider questions also get resolved. The wider stuff that's already happened to do with Dissery and to do with America, to do with Abel's origin in America. All of that kind of gets picked up and resolved, and we meet lots more characters. We also, it's for a Wolfian book. Remember, a Wolfe trick is to have a big cast, but actually it's a very small main cast that you spend an enormous amount of time with via. And that this, I mean, I'm talking about in terms of his big series, not in terms of his standalones. But, you keep looping back to them. You have these gyres in which you return to the same character again and again. We've met Baldanders and Dr. Talos yet again. That sort of thing. And I think here you have that. You do have a lot of that gyring into characters. But you also have new characters coming up and old characters being attached to new characters and this ever-expanding cast. And it's possibly the most, in that sense, one of the most expansive casts in Wolfe. Castleview, which I recently reviewed, actually has a surprisingly expansive cast for a very short book, actually, by his, not by his standards, it's reasonably normal, but by big fantasy standards, it's a short book and it has a big cast. This ends up with a big cast and it earns it and it's worth it. There are lots of, the character work here is fantastic and is at the most crunchy and complex in Wolfian terms. And not so much Abel. Abel's a great character, but what I mean is just you're dealing with, there's a character of whom Abel observes, she chooses good, but it seems like evil has chosen her, which as an insight into a sort of certain kind of perhaps tragic personality in some sense is very interesting, is an interesting Wolfian point. The world building, as I've said, is incredible. It's very subtle at times and very indirect at times, but that's one of the things that the crescendo comes, the building, the way in which the ending takes on to do with the way that the plot, the characters, and the world building all smash together, and this weird whatever's really going on, how Abel has ended up in this world, what's really going on to do with America, etc., which I think is very satisfying. That becomes something that kind of comes out in just little cinematic bursts, but it all comes together, and I think the invasion of everything else by the world building and vice versa is part of what makes this so satisfying. What gets said is that one thing that gets said, I've seen said, and I agree with, is that this is one of Wolfe's best endings, and the reason it is not for though there's some satisfying action scenes and emotional scenes and character scenes and world building moments. And the actual very end, the last kind of few pages are themselves just a incredibly virtuosic turn. It's also just in general, and there's a whole thing where he's doing incredibly clever things with, he's just suddenly decided, okay, now we're just going to do these genre things. Now we're just going to do this. We're going to execute it well. It's going to happen. There's going to be this cool new thing. There's going to be this cool new place. There's going to be this cool action scene. And it's like bim, bam, boom. In a way that is comparatively rare in Wolfe, and it's the opposite, intentionally the opposite of Long Sun, for those who've read Wolfe, Latin Wolfe, where, he intentionally keeps a lot of stuff off stage because it's a very stagey thing with the highest amount of, Wolfian dialogue, which is a massive way he communicates. But Long Sun is very intentional at keeping lots of the action off stage. Wizard Knight, but in this case, Wizard is very much about, there's a lot more of it on stage. But I think the ending becomes, it's I don't know how to describe it. It's Wolfe in his pomp, really, and it's a relatively late novel, relatively speaking, for him. It's 30 years after his first and 15 years. So it's 2/3 of the way through his career. 15 years before his last. It is an almost mystical and sublime experience. Sometimes in ways it's hard to articulate as you're reading it, or indeed as you can tell afterward. It's just very powerful and very interesting and very special. There are comparable moments in other Wolfe books. I do think Castleview is, for you Wolfe fans, a useful comparison in terms of the sniffiness over that. Obviously, some of us like it, I do, others do not. But I think there's stuff going on there that you could see as thematically connected. There's Arthurian stuff, and the way some of that works out in terms of mythic cycles definitely comes up here. So I thought it was great. I guess I could say that Goodreads ratings are kind of frustrating in one way, mostly because very often you're like, is this a 3 or a 4 star? Well, how do you even say? there can be a funny thing there where it ends up, it's so blunt. I'm not so much worried about all my subjective feelings and the complexities, but rather I want kind of a percentage scale or a, you know, I use 0.5s out of 10, so I use 20-point scales for things other stuff I do. But it's a useful thing to think, is this a 4-star because it's structurally just a bit baggy, and it ends up being slightly cheeky and turning itself round, and then no, it's a 5-star because it just pulled it off so well. It's so satisfying. It really pays off all the character stuff from the first book, and is for an author who does world building very well, and you get to learn lots about stuff, the world. It is, and this is sometimes less direct actually than New Sun or Long Sun actually, but nonetheless, this is one of the most satisfying pieces of world building Wolfe does as well. So yeah, I highly recommend both books if you've not read The Wizard, but you have read The Knight, read The Wizard. Certainly, if you listen to all of this, read the whole of it. I don't know if it's a good starter for Wolfe. That's one thing. It's also occasionally thrown up as is this a good intro to Wolfe? Wolfe is a hard person to be introduced to as an author because you're always jumping in the deep end. There's no book which is like this, shows you all his strengths, but without being that hard. There's nothing really like that. I mean, I think I talked about this with Castleview. I think you could reasonably almost recommend Pandora by Holly Hollander or Castleview, two relatively simple novels by him, if you want, but then they're not necessarily very representative. And in fact, you might even think, oh, I'm kind of confused, but I don't really get where the depth is. Whereas New Sun, you're not going to doubt where the depth is. Long Sun, you're not going to doubt where the depth is. Fifth Head of Cerberus, you're not going to doubt. Wizard Knight, I find it very strange it gets commented on as it's a good introduction because it kind of feels like a YA novel that then becomes more. It literally maybe very slightly uses a trope of a YA novel, i.e. the portal fantasy, but it's so quickly obviously nothing to do with that, and not at all YA, that I hardly know what to say to that. I think it is approachable as a genuinely, often very satisfying action adventure that is obviously also about lots of other things. In that sense, it maybe is slightly easier than New Sun, which it's not always clear what, it's intentionally very vague as to genre. And Long Sun is very intentionally stagey and talky rather than actiony. So as a Gene Wolfe recommendation for yourself or for other people who you're wondering about what to recommend, I guess I'd say it's not a bad place to start, but it's not simple. It is not a simple Wolfe book, I would say. Anyway, that is my thoughts on Wizard Knight by Gene Wolfe. If you've read Wizard, it's my thoughts on Wizard. If you've read Wizard, tell me what you think in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think, and I will see you next time.